Sarah Mackenzie pulled her worn leather gloves tighter as the desert wind whipped across her face. The trading post she managed for her late husband sat 20 miles behind her now, and the sun was beginning its descent toward the jagged horizon. She shouldn't have been out here alone, but old Mrs. Patterson needed medicine for her fever, and Sarah couldn't let the elderly woman suffer another night. The sound reached her ears first, a low groan carried on the evening breeze. Sarah's horse, a sturdy mare named Copper, flicked her ears forward and snorted nervously. Something was wrong. Sarah had lived on the frontier long enough to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming danger. She guided Copper toward a cluster of red rocks where the sound seemed to originate. What she found there made her heart skip several beats. A man lay crumpled against the stone, his dark skin gleaming with sweat and blood. His long black hair was matted with dirt and crimson, and his leather clothing marked him clearly as Apache. Sarah's first instinct was to turn around and ride away as fast as Copper could carry her. The Apache had been raiding settlements for months, and just last week they'd attacked a wagon train only 15 miles south. But as she looked at the wounded man, she saw something that gave her pause. He was young, maybe in his 20s, and his breathing was shallow and labored. A deep gash ran across his left shoulder, and his right leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. He was dying. "Lord help me," Sarah whispered, dismounting from her horse. She'd been a frontier woman long enough to know that mercy was often a luxury she couldn't afford. But she'd also been raised by parents who believed every life had value. The warrior's eyes fluttered open as she approached. They were dark brown, almost black, and filled with pain but also wariness. He tried to reach for something at his side, probably a weapon, but his arm fell limply back to the ground. "Easy there," Sarah said softly, keeping her hands visible. "I'm not going to hurt you." He stared at her with suspicion, his jaw clenched against the pain. She noticed he was younger than she'd first thought, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. Despite his injuries, there was something noble about his bearing that surprised her. Sarah knelt beside him and examined his wounds more closely. The shoulder gash was deep but clean, likely from a knife rather than a bullet. His leg was definitely broken, probably from a fall. She'd seen similar injuries before when horses threw their riders. "What happened to you?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. To her surprise, he spoke. His English was accented but clear. "Horse fell. Bandit shot." Sarah's eyes widened. Bandits, not soldiers or settlers. That changed things. The Apache might raid settlements, but the bandits that roamed these lands were worse. They killed indiscriminately and took whatever they wanted. "How many bandits?" she asked. He held up 3 fingers, then winced as the movement sent pain through his shoulder. Sarah looked around nervously. If there were bandits in the area, they were both in danger. She made a decision that went against every piece of frontier wisdom she'd ever learned. "I'm going to help you," she said firmly. "But we need to get out of here before those bandits come back." The warrior studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to determine her motives. Finally, he gave a small nod. Sarah went to work quickly. She had medical supplies in her saddlebags. Living on the frontier meant always being prepared for injuries. She cleaned his shoulder wound as best she could and bound it with clean cloth. The leg would be trickier. "This is going to hurt," she warned him before splinting the broken limb with a piece of wood from her supplies. He gritted his teeth but didn't cry out, even when she had to straighten the bone. His stoic endurance impressed her. She'd seen grown men scream over less painful injuries. "What's your name?" she asked as she worked. He hesitated before answering. "Joseph." It was clearly not his real name. But Sarah didn't press. Everyone on the frontier had secrets. "I'm Sarah," she offered in return. Getting him onto her horse proved to be the biggest challenge. Joseph was taller and heavier than her late husband had been, and his injuries made it difficult for him to help much. After several attempts, they managed to get him seated behind her. though she could feel his strength fading fast. "Where can I take you?" she asked. "Your people?" "No," he said quickly. "Cannot go back now. Not like this." Sarah understood. Returning to his tribe wounded and alone might be seen as shameful. Pride was important to the Apache, she'd heard. "There's an old line shack about 10 miles north," she said. "It's been abandoned for years, but it'll give us shelter for the night." She felt him nod weakly against her back. As they rode, she could feel his weight growing heavier as he fought unconsciousness. More than once, she had to adjust her grip to keep him from sliding off the horse. The sun was nearly gone when they reached the line shack. It was little more than a wooden shelter built to house cowboys during cattle drives, but it had 4 walls and a roof. Sarah helped Joseph inside and got him settled on the old cot that still remained from the shack's working days. By lamplight, she could see just how pale he'd become. Blood loss and shock were taking their toll. She gave him water and checked his bandages, relieved to see that the bleeding had mostly stopped. "You saved my life," he said quietly as she tended to him. "Day's not over yet," Sarah replied. "Those bandits might still be looking for you." "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why what? Why help me?" "Your people and mine, we are enemies." Sarah paused in her ministrations. It was a fair question, and one she'd been asking herself since the moment she'd decided to help him. "I've seen enough death," she said finally. "My husband died 2 years ago. Cholera took our only child before that. Sometimes I think there's already too much dying in this world without me adding to it." Joseph was quiet for a long moment. "I am sorry for your losses." His sympathy surprised her. She'd expected many things from an Apache warrior, but gentle condolences hadn't been one of them. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you have family?" A shadow crossed his features. "It is complicated." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the sound of hoofbeats outside made them both freeze. 3 horses, moving slowly, as if the riders were searching for something. Sarah quickly extinguished the lamp, plunging the shack into darkness. Through the single window, she could see torches moving in the distance. "The bandits," Joseph whispered. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She reached for the rifle she'd brought in from her saddle, checking to make sure it was loaded. Beside her, she heard Joseph trying to sit up despite his injuries. "Stay down," she hissed. "You're in no condition to fight. I will not let you face them alone. You don't have a choice. You can barely sit up." The hoofbeats were getting closer. Sarah moved to the window and peered out carefully. 3 men on horseback were indeed searching the area, their torches casting dancing shadows across the desert landscape. She could hear them talking, though their words were indistinct. One of the riders dismounted and began examining the ground near where Sarah had stopped to water copper. Her stomach dropped as she realized he was following their trail. "They're tracking us," she whispered to Joseph. "There is a back way out?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. The line shack had been built against a rocky outcropping, with only one door facing the open desert. The voices were getting louder now. Sarah could make out words in Spanish mixed with English. These weren't local bandits. They were probably part of one of the Mexican gangs that crossed the border to prey on isolated settlements. "Listen to me," Joseph said urgently, his voice barely audible. "When they come, tell them you found me already dead. Say you stopped only to rest. I'm not abandoning you. You must. They will kill us both if they know you helped me." Sarah gripped her rifle tighter. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll kill them first." Despite everything, she heard him make a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "You are very brave, Sarah Mackenzie." The fact that he used her last name caught her attention. She didn't remember telling him her surname. But before she could ask about it, one of the bandits called out in heavily accented English. "We know someone is in there. Come out with your hands up." Sarah's mouth went dry. There was no point in hiding now. She stood slowly, keeping her rifle ready but not immediately threatening. "I'm coming out," she called back. "I'm alone, and I'm not looking for trouble." She glanced back at Joseph, who had managed to prop himself up against the wall despite his injuries. In the dim light filtering through the window, she could see him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Remember what I said," he whispered. Sarah nodded reluctantly and moved toward the door. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the latch. She'd faced dangerous men before. Frontier life demanded it, but never while trying to protect someone else. The door creaked open, and she stepped out into the cool night air. The three bandits sat their horses in a semicircle about 20 feet away, their torches creating a flickering circle of light. They were rough-looking men with stubbled faces and clothes that had seen too many days on the trail. The leader, a heavy-set man with a scar running down his left cheek, spoke first. "Where is he, Senora?" "Where is who?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Do not play games. We followed the trail of 2 horses to this place. 1 horse leaves carrying 2 riders. Where is the Apache?" Sarah's mind raced. These men were clearly experienced trackers. Lying would be pointless. "He's inside," she said finally. "But he's dead, died about an hour ago from his injuries." The scarred man exchanged glances with his companions. "You will show us." It wasn't a request. Sarah nodded and turned back toward the shack, her heart pounding. She prayed that Joseph would have the presence of mind to play dead convincingly. As she pushed the door open, she was startled to find the interior appeared empty. The cot where Joseph had been lying was vacant, the blanket rumpled as if someone had recently vacated it. "Where?" the bandit leader demanded, pushing past her into the shack. Sarah stared at the empty cot in confusion. Joseph's injuries had been severe. There was no way he could have moved without help, let alone disappeared entirely. He was right here," she stammered. The bandits searched the small space thoroughly, but found nothing except the blood-stained bandages Sarah had used to treat Joseph's wounds. "Perhaps he crawled outside to die," suggested one of the other bandits. They spent the next hour searching the area around the line shack with their torches, but found no trace of Joseph. It was as if he had simply vanished into the night. Finally, the leader returned to where Sarah waited by the shack. "You are very lucky, Senora. If we had found him alive, things would have gone badly for you." "I told you he was dead," Sarah said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. The bandit studied her face in the torchlight. "Perhaps, but dead men do not usually walk away on broken legs." Sarah's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "Maybe the coyotes dragged him off." After another long moment, the bandit leader shrugged. "No matter. He will not survive long in the desert with those injuries." He turned to his men. "We ride." Sarah watched them mount their horses and disappear into the darkness, her knees weak with relief. Only when she was certain they were gone did she allow herself to wonder what had happened to Joseph. She searched the area around the shack more thoroughly than the bandits had, looking for any sign of where he might have gone. It was then that she noticed something strange, a series of marks on the rocks behind the shack that looked almost like handholds. Looking up, she realized they led to a narrow ledge about 15 feet above the ground. "Joseph," she called softly. A moment later, his voice drifted down from above. "They are gone?" "Yes, they're gone. But how did you get up there?" There was a pause before he answered. "I am not as helpless as I appeared." Over the next few minutes, Joseph made his way carefully down from the ledge. Sarah was amazed to see that while he still favored his injured leg, he was moving far better than someone with a broken bone should have been able to manage. "Your leg," she said, staring at him in confusion. "I thought it was broken." "Badly sprained," he admitted, "but not broken. The shoulder wound is real enough, though. Sarah felt a surge of anger. You lied to me. I was testing you. Testing me for what? Joseph met her eyes steadily. To see what kind of person you truly are. Whether you would help someone you believed to be helpless, even if that someone was supposed to be your enemy. And? You passed the test, Sarah Mackenzie. Again, he used her full name, though she was certain she hadn't told him her surname. The realization sent a chill down her spine. Who are you, really? She asked quietly. Joseph was silent for a long moment, studying her face in the dim starlight. Finally, he spoke. That is a story for tomorrow. Tonight we should rest. Those bandits may return, and we will need to be ready to travel at first light. Sarah wanted to press him for answers, but exhaustion was catching up with her. The events of the evening had drained her more than she cared to admit. They settled in to wait out the night, taking turns keeping watch. Sarah found herself stealing glances at her mysterious companion, wondering what other secrets he might be hiding. One thing was certain. Joseph was far more than he appeared to be, and morning couldn't come soon enough. As she watched him tend to his shoulder wound with practiced efficiency, Sarah began to realize she might have gotten herself into something far more complicated than a simple act of frontier mercy. The question was whether she would live long enough to regret it. Dawn broke across the desert with fingers of pink and gold stretching across the endless sky. Sarah woke to find Joseph already awake, sitting quietly near the window and watching the horizon with alert eyes. His shoulder wound had stopped bleeding completely, and he moved with surprising grace for someone who had seemed near death just hours before. See anything? Sarah asked, stretching the stiffness from her back. No sign of the bandits, Joseph replied. But that does not mean they are gone for good. Sarah gathered her few belongings and checked her supplies. The water was running low, and they would need to find a source soon if they planned to travel far. She noticed Joseph watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. What? She asked. You move like someone who knows this land well, he observed. How long have you lived here? 8 years, Sarah answered. Came out here with my husband when we were both young and foolish enough to think we could make our fortune. And did you? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. We made a life. That's worth more than gold, I suppose. They prepared to leave as the sun climbed higher. Joseph's horse was nowhere to be found, either killed by the bandits or run off during the attack. That meant they would have to ride double on copper, which would slow them down considerably. Where are we headed? Joseph asked as they mounted the mare. Sarah had been thinking about that question all night. There's a mission about 30 miles northeast. Father Miguel runs it. He's helped people before, no questions asked. A priest? Joseph seemed surprised. Not all white men are your enemies, Sarah said. Just like not all Apache are mine. They rode in companionable silence for the first few hours, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Sarah found herself acutely aware of Joseph's presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way he adjusted his weight to help Copper navigate the rough terrain. He was an excellent rider, she noticed, moving with the horse rather than fighting against it. Around midday, they stopped at a small waterhole that Sarah knew was usually reliable. As Copper drank deeply, Sarah refilled their water containers and tried to assess their situation. They were still at least 20 miles from the mission and traveling slowly with 2 riders on 1 horse. Sarah, Joseph said suddenly, his voice tense. She looked up from the water to see him staring intently at something in the distance. Following his gaze, she spotted a dust cloud on the southern horizon, riders, at least 4 or 5 of them, heading in their direction. More bandits? She asked. Joseph shook his head. No, these ride in formation. Military, perhaps, or Apache. Sarah's heart sank. Either option could be bad news. If they were soldiers, they might assume Joseph was her captor. If they were Apache, they might see her as a threat to be eliminated. "We need to move," she said, quickly capping the water containers. "Wait," Joseph said, still watching the approaching riders. "I recognize something." "What?" Instead of answering, Joseph stood and cupped his hands around his mouth, making a sound that Sarah had never heard before. A complex series of calls that seemed to blend human voice with the cry of a hawk. The sound echoed across the desert, eerily beautiful and unmistakably Apache. After a moment, an answering call came from the direction of the riders. Joseph relaxed visibly. "Friends?" Sarah asked. "Family," Joseph replied, but his expression was troubled rather than relieved. The riders approached quickly, resolving into 5 Apache warriors mounted on horses painted for war. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward her rifle, but Joseph placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Do not show fear," he said quietly, "and do not reach for weapons. Let me speak first." The lead rider was an older man with gray streaks in his long black hair and scars marking his face and arms. He looked like someone who had seen many battles and won most of them. His eyes fixed on Sarah with unconcealed hostility before turning to Joseph. What followed was a rapid conversation in Apache that Sarah couldn't follow. The tones started angry, with several of the warriors gesturing toward Sarah in ways that didn't seem friendly. But as Joseph continued speaking, the mood seemed to shift slightly. Finally, the older warrior addressed Sarah directly in English. "You are the woman who helped him?" "Yes," Sarah answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why?" It was the same question Joseph had asked her, and Sarah gave the same answer. "Because he needed help." The warrior studied her for a long moment. "My grandson says you risked your own life to protect him from bandits." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "Grandson?" She looked at Joseph with new understanding. If this man was his grandfather, and he commanded the respect these other warriors clearly showed him. "What is your name, woman?" the older warrior continued. "Sarah Mackenzie." Recognition flickered in the man's eyes. "Mackenzie, your husband ran the trading post at Devil's Creek?" "Yes." "How did you—" "Thomas Mackenzie was an honest man. He traded fairly with all people, Apache included. I am sorry for his loss." Sarah was stunned. She had known that Thomas occasionally traded with Apache, but he had never mentioned meeting anyone of obvious importance. The older warrior spoke briefly to his men in Apache, then turned back to Sarah. "You will come with us." "I was taking Joseph to the mission," Sarah protested. "The mission is the wrong direction. There are soldiers there now asking questions about Apache movements. It would not be safe for any of us." Sarah looked at Joseph, who nodded slightly. "They can take you somewhere safe," he said. "What about you?" "I will be going a different direction." Something in his tone told Sarah that this wasn't just a temporary parting. The thought bothered her more than she cared to admit. "Actually," the older warrior said, "there is somewhere we all need to go first. My grandson has much to explain." They traveled for several hours into rougher country, winding through canyons and mesas that Sarah had never seen before. The Apache knew hidden paths through terrain that looked impassable to her inexperienced eyes. She found herself impressed by their skill and knowledge of the land. As the sun began to set, they reached what appeared to be a temporary camp hidden in a box canyon. There were perhaps 20 people there, warriors, women, and children. They looked up as the group approached, and Sarah noticed many of them staring at her with curiosity rather than hostility. Joseph helped her down from copper, his hand lingering on hers longer than necessary. "Sarah, there are things I need to tell you." "I'm listening." "Not here. Tonight when the others are sleeping." An elderly Apache woman approached them, speaking rapidly to Joseph in their native language. She seemed upset about something, gesturing frequently toward the south. Joseph's expression grew more serious as she spoke. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "More soldiers have been seen near the trading posts. They are asking about Apache who speak English well, who might be working with white settlers." Sarah felt a chill. "They're looking for you specifically?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps for someone like me." That evening, Sarah sat around a small fire with Joseph and several other Apache, sharing a meal of rabbit stew and cornbread. The conversation flowed between English and Apache, but she noticed that several of the people seemed to defer to Joseph in ways that suggested he was more important than just another warrior. One of the older women kept staring at Sarah with what seemed like recognition, finally approaching her as the evening wore on. "You have your husband's eyes," the woman said in heavily accented English. "You knew Thomas?" "Many times he came to trade. Good man. Fair prices. He spoke of his wife often." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. It had been months since anyone had mentioned Thomas with such warmth. "He spoke of you too," the woman continued. "Said you were strong woman, brave woman. He was proud." After the meal, Joseph led Sarah away from the camp to a high ledge that overlooked the canyon. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the desert landscape. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, settling onto a flat rock beside him. "This is my homeland," Joseph replied. "My people have lived here for generations beyond counting. And now everything is changing. The soldiers want us on reservations. The settlers want our land. Some of my people want to fight until we are all dead. Others want to surrender and hope for mercy." Sarah studied his profile in the moonlight. "What do you want?" Joseph was quiet for a long time. "I want to find a third way, a path that lets my people survive with dignity." "Is that possible?" "I don't know, but I have to try." He turned to look at her directly. "Sarah, what I am about to tell you could put you in great danger. Are you certain you want to know?" Sarah's heart began to beat faster, but she nodded. "Tell me." Joseph took a deep breath. "My grandfather is called Many Horses. He leads one of the largest bands of Apache in this territory. The man you met today commands the loyalty of over 300 warriors." Sarah's eyes widened. Many Horses was a name she had heard before, a legendary Apache leader who had been fighting both Mexican and American forces for decades. "That makes you—" "His grandson, yes, but also something else. For the past 2 years, I have been serving as a liaison between my people and the American authorities. I speak English well, and I understand both cultures. My job has been to try to negotiate peace treaties that both sides can live with." Sarah stared at him in shock. "You're a diplomat?" "Of sorts. Though if the wrong people discovered my identity, both sides would consider me a traitor." "The bandits who attacked you?" "Were paid by someone who wants these peace negotiations to fail. There are people, both Apache and American, who profit from continued warfare. They see peace as a threat to their interests." Sarah felt her head spinning. "So when you tested me, I needed to know if you could be trusted. My life depends on being able to judge character accurately." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of Joseph's revelation settling between them. "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah finally asked. "Because I need your help." "My help? I'm just a frontier woman who runs a trading post." "No," Joseph said firmly. "You are much more than that. You have contacts in the white community that I cannot access safely. You know which officials can be trusted and which cannot. And after yesterday, I know that you can be trusted with secrets that could get people killed." Sarah looked out over the moonlit canyon, her mind racing. Everything had changed so quickly. Just 2 days ago, her biggest concern had been whether she had enough supplies to last the winter. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "There is going to be a meeting," Joseph said carefully. a secret gathering of Apache leaders and American officials who want to try one more time to make peace. But we need someone who can move freely in both worlds to help arrange it. That's dangerous for everyone involved. Yes, but the alternative is a war that will destroy my people and cost many American lives as well. Sarah turned to study Joseph's face in the moonlight. There was something else, something he wasn't saying. What aren't you telling me? Joseph hesitated. The meeting is supposed to happen in 1 week, but yesterday's attack was not random. Someone knows about the peace talks and they are trying to stop them. By killing you? By killing the negotiators, yes, both Apache and American. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night air. How many people know about this meeting? Too many, which is why we need to change the location and the timing. We need to arrange it through someone no one would suspect. Someone like me. Someone exactly like you. Sarah stood and walked to the edge of the ledge, looking down into the dark canyon below. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had built together on the frontier. He had always said that sometimes a person had to take risks to do what was right. If I help you, she said finally, and we're caught, both sides will assume I'm a traitor. Yes, I could lose everything. My trading post, my reputation, maybe my life. Yes. Sarah turned back to face him. And if I don't help? Then the war continues, and many people die who don't have to die. It wasn't really a choice, Sarah realized. She had already committed herself the moment she decided to help an injured Apache warrior instead of leaving him to die in the desert. What do you need me to do? Joseph smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, it was a smile of genuine warmth rather than calculation. First, we need to get you safely back to your trading post. Then, we need to make contact with a man named Colonel Harrison at Fort Verde. He's one of the few American officers who genuinely wants peace. I know Harrison, Sarah said. He's come through the trading post a few times. Seems like an honest man. Good. We will need to arrange a meeting that looks like a routine supply run or trading expedition. Sarah nodded slowly. It could work, but there are a lot of things that could go wrong. There are, but there are also things that could go very right. As they prepared to return to the camp, Sarah found herself wondering how she had gone from a simple act of mercy to being recruited into secret peace negotiations. Life on the frontier was unpredictable, but this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Joseph, she said as they walked back down the canyon path. Yes? What you told me about being a diplomat and negotiator, that's all true? Yes. But there's more, isn't there? Something you're still not telling me. Joseph stopped walking and turned to face her. In the moonlight, she could see that he was struggling with something. Yes, he said finally. But that revelation will have to wait until tomorrow. Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud in the darkness. As they rejoined the camp, Sarah found herself more curious than ever about the mysterious man she had rescued. Tomorrow would bring more surprises, she was certain. The only question was whether she would survive them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the canyon floor as Sarah prepared to leave the Apache camp. Joseph had arranged for 2 warriors to escort her back to within sight of her trading post. But she could tell something was troubling him. He had been quiet since they woke, speaking only when necessary and avoiding her eyes. Many horses approached as Sarah was checking her supplies one last time. The old warrior looked even more imposing in daylight, his weathered face marked by decades of desert sun and conflict. Mrs. Mackenzie, he said formally, my grandson tells me you have agreed to help arrange the peace meeting. I have, Sarah confirmed, though I still don't fully understand why you trust me with something so important. Many horses studied her for a long moment. Your husband once helped my people during a very hard winter. He sold us supplies at cost when other traders would have charged triple. He also warned us when soldiers were planning a raid on our winter camp. Sarah's breath caught. Thomas had never told her about warning the Apache about military movements. That would have been considered treason by most frontier communities. "He never mentioned that," she said quietly. "He was a wise man who understood that some truths are dangerous to share, even with those we love most." Sarah glanced at Joseph, who was finally looking at her again. There was something meaningful in his expression, as if his grandfather's words carried a deeper message. The journey back toward the trading post took most of the day. Sarah rode with one of the warriors while Joseph walked alongside, his injuries apparently healed enough to allow for steady travel. They stayed to game trails and hidden paths, avoiding the main routes where soldiers or bandits might be encountered. As they neared familiar territory, Sarah began to recognize landmarks. They were only a few miles from her home now. The thought of returning to her normal routine, running the trading post, tending to customers, managing inventory, seemed almost surreal after everything that had happened. "This is where we part ways," Joseph said as they reached a ridge overlooking the valley where Sarah's trading post sat. Sarah dismounted and gathered her belongings. The two Apache warriors who had escorted them remained on their horses, clearly eager to return to the safety of their hidden canyon. "When will I see you again?" Sarah asked. "Soon. I will come to the trading post in 3 days, but I will come as a customer, not as myself. We must be careful about being seen together too often." Sarah nodded, understanding the need for caution. "What should I tell Colonel Harrison when I contact him?" "Tell him you have information about a possible trade agreement with peaceful Apache groups. Suggest a meeting to discuss terms. And if he's suspicious about why I'm suddenly interested in such things, tell him you've heard rumors about increased Apache activity, and you want to explore alternatives to conflict. It's not entirely untrue." Sarah shouldered her pack and prepared to make the final walk to her home alone. But something made her pause. "Joseph," she said, "yesterday you said there was something else you hadn't told me. Something too dangerous to speak in the darkness." Joseph glanced at his companions, then back at Sarah. "Walk with me a little further," he said. They moved away from the other warriors, out of earshot, to where a cluster of boulders provided some privacy. Joseph seemed to be struggling with himself, starting to speak several times before stopping. "What is it?" Sarah asked gently. "Do you remember when we first met, and I told you my name was Joseph?" "Yes." "That was not entirely a lie. Joseph is one of my names. But it is not the name I was born with, and it is not the name most people know me by." Sarah waited patiently for him to continue. "My Apache name is Nalnish, which means he works hard. But for the past 5 years, I have been living in 2 worlds. In the Apache world, I am the grandson of many horses, a warrior and negotiator. In the white world, I am Joseph Crow Feather, graduate of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. The Carlisle School was famous throughout the frontier, a government institution where Apache and other Indian children were sent to be educated in white ways. "You were sent to boarding school?" "When I was 12 years old, soldiers came and took me from my family. They said it was for my own good that I would learn to be civilized." Joseph's voice carried old pain. "I spent 6 years there, learning English, mathematics, American history, Christian theology. They cut my hair and forbade me to speak Apache. They tried to make me forget who I was." Sarah felt her heart ache for the boy he had been, torn from his family and forced into a foreign world. "But you didn't forget." "No. And when I graduated, I realized I had been given a unique opportunity. I understood both worlds in a way few people could. I could serve as a bridge between them." "So you returned to your people?" "Eventually, but first I spent 2 years working for the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C. Sarah stared at him in complete shock. You worked for the government? I did. I translated documents, advised on Apache customs and territory, helped write policies related to reservation life. Joseph's expression was grim. I thought I could change things from the inside, make the policies more fair and humane. What happened? I learned that most of the men making decisions about Apache lives had never met an Apache person. They saw us as problems to be solved, not people to be understood. And I realized that some of the policies I had helped write were being used to justify terrible things. Sarah was beginning to understand the full complexity of Joseph's position. So, you left Washington and came back. 3 years ago. But by then, both sides viewed me with suspicion. Many Apache saw me as contaminated by white ways, possibly a spy for the government. Many whites saw me as a potential threat, an Apache who knew too much about their plans and weaknesses. That's why the peace negotiations are so dangerous for you personally. If they succeed, I will be seen as a hero by some and a traitor by others. If they fail, everyone will blame me. Joseph met her eyes directly. Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is the most dangerous secret of all. Sarah braced herself. The peace meeting I told you about, it's not just important for my people and the local military. There are officials coming from Washington, including some from the Bureau of Indian Affairs who know exactly who I am. What does that mean? It means that if word gets out about my involvement, there will be people in the government who want me silenced permanently. I know too many secrets about policies that were supposed to remain hidden. Sarah felt the weight of revelation settling on her shoulders. Joseph wasn't just an Apache warrior, or even a diplomat. He was a man caught between two worlds, trusted by neither, carrying secrets that could embarrass or endanger powerful people. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because if something happens to me during the negotiations, someone needs to know the truth. And because... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I have never met anyone I trusted enough to share these secrets with. Until now. The simple honesty of his admission hit Sarah like a physical blow. She realized that what had begun as a simple act of mercy had evolved into something much deeper and more complicated. Joseph, she said softly, what you're asking me to do, it's not just helping arrange a meeting, is it? No. If the negotiations succeed, I will need to disappear for a while. The people who want to stop peace will not give up easily. I may need to stay hidden until things settle down. And if they fail, I will probably be dead. Sarah stared at him, feeling the full weight of what he was asking her to risk. She would not just be helping arrange a peace meeting, she would be protecting a man whose very existence threatened powerful interests on both sides of the conflict. There's something else, isn't there? She said, reading his expression. Joseph nodded slowly. The colonel you're going to contact, Harrison, he knows who I am. He was one of the officers who originally recommended me to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Is he trustworthy? I believe so. But Sarah, when you contact him and mention Joseph Crow Feather, you will be identifying yourself as someone who knows my secret. There will be no going back. Sarah looked down at the valley where her trading post waited. She could see smoke rising from the chimney where her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was probably keeping the fire going. It looked so peaceful and normal. A life where her biggest worries were inventory and seasonal supply runs. What would Thomas do? She asked herself aloud. I knew your husband only slightly, Joseph said, but from what I observed, he was a man who believed in doing what was right, even when it was dangerous. Sarah made her decision. Tell me exactly what you need me to do. Relief flooded Joseph's face. Contact Harrison and tell him that Joseph Crowfeather needs to arrange a meeting regarding Apache peace negotiations. He'll understand immediately. When and where? Tell him the old mining camp at Willow Creek, 5 days from now, at sunset. That will give us time to make sure the location is secure. Sarah nodded, memorizing the details. What about you? Where will you be? I'll be watching, making sure it's not a trap. If everything looks safe, I'll reveal myself. If not, he shrugged. If not, you disappear and I'm left explaining to a colonel why I set up a meeting with a ghost. Something like that. Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling. You realize this is completely insane. Yes, but it's also the best chance for peace this territory has seen in decades. They walked back toward where the other warriors waited. As they approached, Sarah realized this might be the last time she saw Joseph for quite a while, possibly forever. Joseph, she said, stopping him with a hand on his arm. Whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm glad I found you in those rocks. Even knowing what you know now? Especially knowing what I know now. Joseph covered her hand with his. Sarah Mackenzie, you are a remarkable woman. Your husband was a fortunate man. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Just don't get yourself killed before this is over. I'd hate to think I went through all this trouble for nothing. Joseph laughed, and the sound carried genuine joy for the first time since she had known him. I'll do my best. The next 3 days passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Sarah went through the motions of running her trading post, but her mind was constantly on the upcoming meeting. She sent word to Colonel Harrison through a trusted merchant who made regular supply runs to Fort Verde, using exactly the words Joseph had suggested. Harrison's response came back within 2 days. Interested in discussion, will attend suggested meeting. On the appointed evening, Sarah rode to Willow Creek feeling like her nerves were stretched to the breaking point. The abandoned mining camp was eerily quiet, with only the sound of wind through broken timbers and the distant call of a coyote. She arrived early and waited, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Just as she was beginning to wonder if she had been foolish to trust Joseph's plan, she heard the sound of approaching horses. Colonel Harrison appeared with 2 soldiers, all 3 men alert and obviously prepared for trouble. Harrison was a man in his 50s with graying hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in military service. Mrs. Mackenzie, he said as he dismounted, this is highly unusual. Yes, sir, I know. When you mentioned Joseph Crowfeather, I hoped you meant what I thought you meant. Is he here? Before Sarah could answer, a figure stepped out from behind a large boulder where he had apparently been concealed. Joseph looked every inch the Apache warrior, but when he spoke, his voice carried the educated cadence of someone who had spent years in Eastern schools. Hello, Colonel. It's been a long time. Harrison stared at him in amazement. Joseph? Good God, man, we thought you were dead. There were reports of Apache attacks. And when you disappeared from Washington, I had to disappear. There were people who wanted to use me in ways I couldn't accept. What followed was a 2-hour discussion that laid the groundwork for the most comprehensive peace agreement between Apache and American forces in the territory's history. Sarah listened in fascination as Joseph and Harrison worked through details of territory boundaries, trade agreements, and provisions for Apache people who wanted to live peacefully alongside white settlements. By the time they finished, it was full dark. Harrison shook Joseph's hand and then Sarah's. Mrs. Mackenzie, what you've done here tonight may have saved hundreds of lives on both sides. As the soldiers departed, Sarah found herself alone with Joseph under the stars. So what happens now? She asked. Now we see if both sides honor the agreement. Joseph was quiet for a moment. Sarah, there's one more thing I need to tell you. Sarah's heart sank. More secrets? Not a secret, a truth. Joseph stepped closer to her. When this is over, when the peace holds and I no longer have to live between two worlds. I would like to court you properly. Sarah's breath caught. Joseph, I know it would be complicated. A white woman and an Apache man. Both communities would have opinions about such a union. That's not what concerns me, Sarah said softly. What does concern you? Sarah looked up at his face in the moonlight. I'm concerned that I might already be falling in love with you, and I don't want to lose you to this dangerous game you're playing. Joseph's smile was answer enough. He leaned down and kissed her gently, a promise of possibilities that lay ahead. Then I suppose, he said against her lips, I'd better make sure I survive this dangerous game. 6 months later, Sarah Mackenzie married Joseph Crow Feather in a ceremony that was attended by both Apache and white settlers, one of the first such weddings in the territory. The peace they had helped negotiate held, creating a model that would eventually be used in other parts of the frontier. Sarah never did learn all of Joseph's secrets, but she learned that sometimes the most important truths are not the ones we discover about others, but the ones we discover about ourselves when we choose courage over safety and love over fear. And every morning, as she watched the sun rise over the desert that had become her true home, Sarah gave thanks for the day she chose to help an injured warrior instead of riding away. It was, she reflected, the best decision she had ever made.